Picture this. You're watching The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, and your favorite movie star walks out onto that famous stage. They're smiling, charming, and telling funny stories that make you laugh out loud. But what if I told you that the moment those cameras stop rolling, some of these beloved celebrities turn into completely different people? What if behind those perfect smiles were some truly terrible human beings? For 30 whole years, Johnny Carson was the king of late-night television. Every single night, millions of Americans invited him into their living rooms. He seemed like the nicest guy in the world, always laughing and making his guests feel comfortable. But here's something most people never knew. Johnny kept a secret mental list of guests he thought were absolutely horrible people, not just difficult or demanding, but genuinely bad human beings who shouldn't be trusted around cameras or children. A producer who worked with Carson for over 10 years once revealed something shocking. He said that while Johnny was always professional on camera, the minute they cut to commercial, he would sometimes lean over to his sidekick Ed McMahon and whisper things like that person should never be near a camera or a child. Can you imagine? The man who seemed to love everyone actually had some pretty strong opinions about certain celebrities. As Johnny got older, he started being more honest about which famous people he secretly couldn't stand. The stories he told his close friends paint a really disturbing picture of some stars who seemed sweet and innocent on television, but were actually monsters when the cameras weren't rolling. We're talking about legendary actors and actresses who verbally attacked young workers so badly that security guards had to step in. We're talking about beloved male stars who did things so disturbing in their dressing rooms that Johnny almost called the police. These weren't just stars having bad days or being a little cranky. According to Johnny Carson, these were genuinely dark people hiding behind their fame and talent. They were bullies, abusers, and manipulators who got away with terrible behavior for decades because Hollywood protected them. Today, I'm going to tell you about 9 famous celebrities who earned a permanent spot on Johnny Carson's secret blacklist. And trust me, some of these stories will shock you. Let's start with the first name on Carson's list, a Hollywood legend whose icy behavior earned his most intense dislike. Joan Crawford was one of the biggest movie stars of all time. When she appeared on The Tonight Show in 1970, viewers saw exactly what they expected: a glamorous, elegant woman with perfect posture and practiced charm. She looked like the definition of old Hollywood royalty. But according to multiple people who worked on the show, Joan Crawford's behavior when the cameras weren't rolling revealed someone completely different. Years later, Johnny Carson told a biographer that Joan Crawford was one of the coldest people he'd ever interviewed. He said it was like talking to a beautiful statue with absolutely nothing inside. That's a pretty harsh thing to say about someone, especially for Johnny, who usually tried to find something nice to say about everyone. The problems with Joan Crawford started long before she even arrived at the TV studio. Her demands were so specific and detailed that the show's technical director kept a 4-page memo in his files for decades afterward. Everything had to be absolutely perfect. The angle of her chair, the exact height of Johnny's desk. Even the temperature of the studio had to be exactly 67 degrees. Not 66, not 68, but exactly 67 degrees. One former producer remembered how everything had to be precisely right, or Joan would refuse to do the show. When Joan finally showed up, she arrived 3 whole hours before they were supposed to start filming. She brought her own personal makeup team with her, even though The Tonight Show had award-winning makeup artists working there. But here's the really telling part about Joan Crawford's character. She treated people completely differently based on how important she thought they were. A stagehand who was there that day said Joan practically bowed down to Johnny Carson, being super polite and respectful. But when a young production assistant accidentally walked into her dressing room with the water Joan had requested, everything changed. Joan absolutely exploded. According to multiple people who witnessed it, Joan launched into such a vicious attack on this poor young woman that staff members in the hallway literally froze in shock. The production assistant was only 20 years old and just started her career in television. Joan allegedly called her terrible names and suggested she should go work at a brothel where being incompetent might actually be helpful. Can you imagine being that young woman? She ran out of the room crying, and Joan actually demanded that she be fired immediately. Thankfully, Johnny's producer refused to fire the girl, but this created tension that lasted through the entire show. But here's the most disturbing part about Joan Crawford's appearance. The moment those cameras turned on, she transformed like a machine. One producer said she was like a robot pretending to be a human being. Every answer, every laugh, every supposedly spontaneous moment had been rehearsed and planned out. Nothing about her was real or genuine. During commercial breaks, Joan would immediately drop her smile and sit there with a stone-cold expression, not speaking to anyone at all. Then the instant that red light came back on, she would instantly come back to life like someone had flipped a switch. Johnny Carson was famous for being able to make any guest feel comfortable and relax, but he couldn't find any real connection with Joan Crawford at all. After the show was over, Johnny reportedly told Ed McMahon, "I've interviewed dead people with more personality." That's saying something coming from someone who interviewed thousands of celebrities over 3 decades. Years later, when Joan Crawford's adopted daughter Christina wrote a book called Mommy Dearest that revealed Joan's alleged abuse of her children, Johnny Carson wasn't surprised at all. According to his close friends, he simply nodded and said, "I saw who she really was in those few hours. I believe every single word." But if Joan Crawford's cold, calculating behavior made Johnny uncomfortable, his next problem guest represented something he found even more disturbing: raw power being used to intimidate and threaten people. Frank Sinatra was one of the most famous singers who ever lived. When he appeared on The Tonight Show, viewers saw him joking around, telling stories, and occasionally singing a song. Johnny always seemed respectful and friendly toward Old Blue Eyes. But behind the scenes, Johnny Carson reportedly had a deep dislike for Frank Sinatra, not because of his singing, which Johnny respected, but because of how Frank treated people when he thought no one important was watching. Johnny once told a friend, according to several biographies, if he didn't sing, he'd be a mob enforcer, and sometimes I think he was both. That's a pretty serious accusation from someone who usually kept his negative opinions to himself. Frank Sinatra's appearances on The Tonight Show were notorious among the crew members for creating a really tense atmosphere. According to people who worked there for years, Sinatra would show up with an entourage of up to 8 men who definitely weren't show business types. One cameraman described them as guys you wouldn't want to meet in a dark alley. These men would spread out through the studio, watching the staff and making everyone feel like they were under surveillance. What really disturbed Johnny Carson was seeing how Frank Sinatra treated people he thought were beneath him. During one appearance in the early 1970s, a floor manager made the simple mistake of giving Sinatra the standard 3-minute warning before his segment was about to start. According to several people who saw it happen, Sinatra grabbed the man by his tie, pulled him close, and said, "Nobody tells me when I've got 3 minutes. I'll go on when I'm ready." The floor manager was a Korean War veteran in his 50s, and he was visibly shaken up afterward. When Johnny saw this interaction happening on his office monitor, he nearly canceled Frank's segment entirely. Only his producer reminding him about the huge ratings Sinatra would bring convince him to continue with the show. Another problem with Frank Sinatra was that you never knew if he would actually show up. He allegedly canceled appearances at the last minute multiple times, including once when he was already in the building, but decided he wasn't in the mood to do the show anymore. Imagine having to scramble to fill that time on live television. The most revealing moment came during a commercial break, when Sinatra made a nasty comment about a female staff member's appearance, loud enough for people nearby to hear. Johnny Carson, breaking his usual professional detachment, coldly responded, "We don't talk about my staff that way here." The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Sinatra was visibly surprised that anyone, even Johnny Carson, would dare to challenge him. When the cameras came back on, both men kept their professional faces on, but crew members noticed that Johnny's questions became much shorter and less interested. After that appearance, Johnny reportedly told a producer, "I don't care what his ratings are. Limit him to once a year maximum." This is particularly significant because Johnny Carson rarely got involved in deciding which guest to book, and he almost never banned anyone outright. For him to restrict Frank Sinatra's appearances said volumes about how much he personally disliked the singer's behavior. While Sinatra represented the bullying side of celebrity power, Johnny's next problematic guest showed a different kind of difficulty. An overwhelming ego that thought normal rules didn't apply to them. Orson Welles was a genuine genius who created some of the greatest movies and radio shows of all time. When he appeared on The Tonight Show, viewers saw a charming, brilliant man with a booming voice and incredible stories from his amazing career. But Johnny Carson and his staff saw something else entirely. A man whose ego had grown so enormous that he believed the normal rules of television simply didn't apply to him. Never again, Johnny reportedly said after one particularly difficult Orson Welles appearance. That guy thinks he's still running ancient Rome. The problems with Orson Welles typically began before he even got to the studio. According to Tonight Show writers, Welles would routinely dismiss any prepared questions or topics that Johnny's team had developed for the interview. One former writer remembered that Welles told them their questions were boring and obvious. He literally crossed out every single question and handed back a completely empty page. This put Johnny in the really uncomfortable position of having to interview one of the most important figures in movie history with absolutely no preparation or plan. This was especially challenging because Orson Welles had a tendency to launch into really long, wandering stories that were almost impossible to edit for time. During one appearance in the mid-1970s, Orson Welles was scheduled for a 7-minute segment. Instead, he stayed on that couch for nearly 25 minutes, completely ignoring all the subtle signals Johnny was giving him that it was time to wrap up. A director explained that Johnny had a whole series of hand signals he would use to let guests know when time was running short. Welles saw every single one of them and just kept talking anyway. They had to bump 2 other guests off the show entirely. Welles's behavior toward the staff was equally dismissive and rude. He reportedly refused to speak directly to production assistants. Instead, he would address them in the third person, even when they were standing right next to him. He would say things like, "Tell the girl I need more water," or "Ask the boy to adjust the light." Imagine how demeaning that must have felt for those young people just trying to do their jobs. What particularly irritated Johnny Carson was that Orson Welles treated The Tonight Show like it was his own personal platform rather than Johnny's program. Welles would bring props without asking, change topics without any warning, and even try to direct the camera shots from a seat on the couch. One former producer explained that Welles actually stood up once and tried to tell the camera operators which angles to use. Johnny was absolutely furious. After one especially challenging appearance, Johnny reportedly told Ed McMahon, "Genius doesn't excuse everything. Being brilliant doesn't give you the right to hijack someone else's show." Johnny Carson was himself a perfectionist about television production, so he found Welles's complete disregard for medium's rules especially irritating. Though Johnny maintained public respect for Orson Welles's massive contributions to film and theater, privately he began to view him as a cautionary tale of what happens when talent gets completely eclipsed by ego. While Orson Welles represented the challenge of dealing with an oversized personality, Johnny's next difficult guest brought a completely different problem: unpredictable behavior that could quickly turn hostile and nasty. Bette Davis was Hollywood royalty, one of the greatest actresses who ever lived. When she appeared on Tonight Show, audiences saw her at her most engaging, telling witty stories in that distinctive voice of hers. She was elegant even in her later years and full of fascinating Hollywood history. What viewers didn't see were the moments before and after the cameras were rolling, when Bette Davis reportedly revealed a personality so harsh and abrasive that even the unflappable Johnny Carson was taken aback. "She doesn't need a stage, she needs a courtroom," Johnny allegedly told Ed McMahon after one particularly difficult appearance. No one should have to be cross-examined by Bette Davis without having a lawyer present. Bette Davis's first offense, according to multiple Tonight Show staff accounts, was a treatment of other guests who appeared on the same show. When she was booked on episodes with other celebrities, Davis would often interrupt them or talk over them, especially if they were younger performers or other women. She would literally turn her back on other guests sitting on the couch with her. A former talent coordinator remembered that if someone else was telling a story that got laughs in the audience, you could actually see Bette seething with anger, planning how to regain control of the conversation. Behind the scenes, Bette Davis's behavior was even more problematic. She reportedly demanded whiskey in her dressing room before appearances. While this wasn't unusual for guests from her era, her alcohol consumption sometimes led to inappropriate comments and behavior that shocked everyone around her. According to female staff members who worked on the show in the 1970s, Betty Davis regularly used language that was sexist and racist, shocking even by the looser standards of that time period. One makeup artist recalled Davis refusing her services and asking instead for someone whose hands don't shake like they're coming off a 3-day drinking binge. Johnny Carson generally avoided confrontation whenever possible, but he made an exception for Betty Davis when she began screaming at a cue card holder for being too slow during a rehearsal. A production assistant who witnessed the incident remembered that Johnny actually stepped in. He very quietly told her, "Miss Davis, on this show we speak to everyone with respect, or we don't speak at all." She was apparently stunned, probably not used to being challenged by anyone, but she did back down. What made Betty Davis particularly difficult for Johnny was the contrast between her undeniable talent and her treatment of other people. Unlike some difficult guests who could be dismissed as untalented, Davis was a genuine legend whose work Johnny truly admired. This made her behavior even more disappointing. After her final appearance on the show in the early 1980s, Johnny reportedly told his producer, "That's the last time. Life's too short to spend it being verbally attacked by Betty Davis, no matter how many Oscars she's won." While Betty Davis at least directed her harsh words at adults who could defend themselves, Johnny's next problematic guest brought a different kind of discomfort: behavior toward young women that crossed professional boundaries in deeply inappropriate ways. Mickey Rooney was Hollywood royalty in a different way. He had been the #1 box office star from 1939 to 1941 and represented a living connection to the industry's golden age. His appearances on The Tonight Show should have been nostalgic celebrations of an incredible career. Instead, according to multiple staff accounts, Mickey Rooney's visits became notorious for his inappropriate behavior, chaotic energy, and occasional intoxication. He thinks being short gives him permission to be a pervert. Johnny reportedly told his producer after one particularly problematic appearance in the mid-1970s. Mickey Rooney, who was in his mid-50s at the time, developed a terrible reputation among female staff members for unwanted touching, suggestive comments, and completely ignoring professional boundaries. According to multiple accounts, young production assistants would actually ask to be reassigned to other duties when they learned Mickey Rooney was booked to appear. One former assistant who worked on the show in the late 1970s remembered that Rooney would grab your hand when you brought him water and try to pull you closer. He would ask personal questions like whether you were married, and if you tried to leave, he would hold on to your wrist just a little too long. This kind of behavior was completely unacceptable, but sadly, it was often tolerated in that era. Even more concerning was Mickey Rooney's apparent inability to recognize when he had consumed too much alcohol. According to Tonight Show employees, he appeared visibly drunk during at least 3 separate appearances, slurring his words and losing his train of thought in the middle of sentences. During one infamous segment in 1977, Mickey Rooney began telling a story about Judy Garland that quickly became completely inappropriate for television, forcing Johnny to cut him off and quickly change the subject. During the commercial break, Johnny reportedly asked his producer, "Is he drunk, or is this just who he is now?" What made Mickey Rooney particularly difficult for Johnny was a generational gap in understanding what constituted appropriate behavior. Born in 1920, Rooney came from an era of Hollywood where certain conduct toward women was sadly commonplace, if not actually approved of. A director who worked on the show for many years explained that Johnny was no prude, but he had very clear lines about professional conduct. Rooney seemed genuinely confused when people called him out on his behavior, like he didn't understand why it was suddenly a problem. After one appearance where Mickey Rooney made repeated inappropriate comments about a young actress who was also appearing on that night's show, Johnny took the unusual step of apologizing to her personally after the taping. The director recalled, "I've never seen Johnny so embarrassed by a guest's behavior. He told her, 'That's not how professionals act on my show. It won't happen again.'" True to his word, Mickey Rooney's appearances became much less frequent in the late 1970s and early 1980s. Johnny reportedly insisted on daytime recordings rather than live evening broadcasts whenever Rooney was booked, probably to avoid any live television disasters. While Mickey Rooney's behavior created deeply uncomfortable situations, Johnny's next challenging guest brought yet another type of difficulty. demands so extensive and unreasonable that they became absolutely legendary among the staff. Zsa Zsa Gabor was a Tonight Show favorite who appeared dozens of times during Johnny's 30-year run. With her glamorous appearance, distinctive Hungarian accent, and flirtatious personality, viewers saw a charming, over-the-top character who played up her background and many marriages for laughs. Behind the scenes, according to numerous staff accounts, Zsa Zsa Gabor was one of the most demanding and difficult guests in the entire history of the show. "I'd rather interview a cat," Johnny reportedly said after a particularly exhausting Zsa Zsa Gabor appearance. At least a cat would need 3 assistants and special lighting. Zsa Zsa's demands began long before she ever arrived at the studio. According to former Tonight Show employees, her standard list of requirements included a specific temperature in her dressing room of exactly 74 degrees, fresh flowers but only orchids and absolutely no carnations, a bottle of Perrier water with exactly 3 ice cubes, her own personal lighting technician flown in at the show's expense, and no female guests who were younger than 40 years old booked on the same episode. A former talent coordinator remembered that her list of demands read like a parody of celebrity requirements. They thought it had to be a joke the first time they received it. But Zsa Zsa was completely serious about every single item. When these requirements weren't met exactly as specified, Zsa Zsa would reportedly refuse to leave her dressing room until the situation was completely fixed, often delaying the taping and throwing off the entire show's carefully planned schedule. One of the most infamous incidents occurred when Zsa Zsa arrived for a taping and discovered that the makeup department didn't have her preferred brand of foundation. According to multiple witnesses, she got into a screaming match with the head makeup artist, demanding that someone be sent to Beverly Hills immediately to purchase the correct product. A former producer remembered that Johnny actually had to intervene personally. He called her directly and said something like, "Zsa Zsa, honey, you look beautiful already and we have a show to do. Let's save the cosmetics emergency for another day." What particularly annoyed Johnny about Zsa Zsa's behavior was how it affected everyone else involved in the production. Other guests would be kept waiting for hours, crew members would have to work overtime, and the show's carefully planned schedule would be thrown into complete chaos. After one appearance where Zsa Zsa arrived 40 minutes late and then complained about how Johnny had introduced her, he reportedly told his executive producer, "Next time she wants to be on the show, tell her we renamed it The Tonight Show starring Zsa Zsa Gabor, and I'll be happy to be her sidekick." Despite all these frustrations, Zsa Zsa continued to appear on the show throughout Johnny's entire career, which says something about her undeniable entertainment value when the cameras were actually rolling and she was performing for the audience. While Zsa Zsa's diva demands created logistical nightmares, Johnny's next challenging guest brought yet another kind of discomfort. Completely unpredictable behavior that could turn a light-hearted interview into an uncomfortable confrontation in seconds. Shelley Winters was a 2-time Oscar winner with a career that spanned several decades. She had gone from glamorous roles in her youth to character parts in her later years. On paper, she should have been an absolutely ideal Tonight Show guest. She was experienced, accomplished, and full of incredible Hollywood stories. In reality, according to those who worked on the show, Shelley Winters was one of Johnny's most unpredictable and explosive guests. "Shelley doesn't talk, she detonates," Johnny reportedly said after one particularly volatile appearance. Shelley Winters became infamous among the show's staff for her complete inability or unwillingness to adapt to the light, entertainment-focused format of late-night television. Rather than sharing amusing stories or promoting her current projects like most guests did, she would often launch into intense political speeches or deeply personal revelations that left Johnny visibly uncomfortable and struggling to regain control. During one appearance in the mid-1970s, what began as a simple question about a recent film quickly turned into Shelley delivering a 5-minute uninterrupted speech about government corruption, leaving Johnny desperately trying to find a way to transition to a commercial break. A former director remembered that Johnny was a master at controlling conversations, but with Shelley, it was like trying to steer a tornado. Once she got going, all he could do was wait for her to run out of steam. Shelley's unpredictability wasn't limited to just her conversational topics either. She became known for physical outbursts as well. In one famous incident on a British talk show, she actually threw a glass of whiskey in fellow guest Oliver Reed's face after he made some sexist comments. This reputation for potential violence made Tonight Show staff genuinely nervous whenever she was booked to appear. A former stage manager admitted, "We would actually remove certain items from the set when we knew she was coming. Anything that could be thrown or knocked over would mysteriously disappear before her segment started." Despite all these challenges, what distinguished Shelley Winters from some of Johnny's other difficult guests was that her behavior seemed to come from genuine passion rather than meanness or ego. She cared deeply about political and social issues and saw every single public appearance as an opportunity to address them, regardless of whether the venue was appropriate for such serious topics. Johnny Carson, while visibly uncomfortable during her more intense moments, maintained a certain level of respect for Shelley's authenticity. After one particularly fiery appearance, where she criticized the Vietnam War, Johnny reportedly told a producer, "I may not want to go on vacation with her, but at least she means every word she says." Nevertheless, Shelley's appearances became much less frequent in the later years of Johnny's career, with the host preferring guests whose conversational style complemented rather than challenged the show's format. While Shelley Winters' passionate unpredictability created on-air challenges, Johnny's next difficult guest represented something he found personally distasteful: extreme political views that specifically targeted vulnerable communities. Jane Russell was one of Hollywood's most famous actresses of the 1940s and 1950s. She was known for movies like The Outlaw and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. With her striking beauty and significant place in film history, she seemed like a natural recurring guest for The Tonight Show. Yet after just a few appearances in the early 1970s, Jane Russell rarely returned to Johnny's couch. According to show insiders, this was because of Johnny's deep discomfort with her increasingly extreme political views and her reported treatment of LGBTQ staff members. Johnny Carson, while personally a moderate Republican for much of his life, maintained a very strict policy of keeping The Tonight Show relatively neutral on divisive political issues. Jane Russell, however, reportedly used backstage interactions to express hardline conservative views that Johnny found deeply troubling. A former producer explained Johnny could handle guests having different political opinions. What bothered him was when those opinions turned into personal attacks on staff members or other guests. According to several accounts, Jane Russell became notorious for making terrible comments about LGBTQ individuals working on the show. During one appearance in the early 1970s, she allegedly refused to allow a gay makeup artist to work on her, demanding a replacement instead. Even more concerning to Johnny was a reported incident involving Rock Hudson, the famous actor whose homosexuality, though not publicly known at the time, was an open secret within Hollywood circles. According to a talent coordinator who worked on the show, Jane Russell refused to be booked on the same episode as Rock Hudson, making derogatory comments about his sexuality. The talent coordinator recalled Johnny had many friends in the gay community, including several staff members. He was actually ahead of his time in not tolerating that kind of discrimination on his show. Johnny's final breaking point with Jane Russell allegedly came during a 1973 appearance when she made dismissive comments about civil rights legislation during a commercial break. Though her remarks weren't picked up by the broadcast microphones, they were overheard by several crew members and eventually reached Johnny's ears. After that appearance, Jane Russell was noticeably absent from The Tonight Show's guest roster for the entire remainder of Johnny's career. This was one of the few clear cases where Johnny appears to have personally banned future bookings. What made this situation particularly notable was Johnny's general reluctance to ban guests outright, especially those with Jane Russell's level of star power and historical significance in Hollywood. For him to take such a definitive stance spoke volumes about how strongly he objected to her behavior. While Jane Russell's politics and treatment of staff created a permanent rift with Johnny Carson, his final and perhaps most intense dislike was reserved for a comedian whose public image and private behavior were reportedly complete opposites. Jerry Lewis was one of America's most successful entertainers. He was a groundbreaking comedian, actor, director, and humanitarian who was known around the world for his annual telethons benefiting muscular dystrophy research. His manic energy and physical comedy had made him a global superstar. Behind the scenes, according to numerous Tonight Show staff accounts, Jerry Lewis was also one of the most difficult and demeaning celebrities in all of Hollywood. This reputation earned him a very special place on Johnny's personal blacklist. He's what happens when ego completely outruns talent. Johnny reportedly told a colleague after a particularly troublesome Jerry Lewis appearance in the mid-1970s. Unlike some difficult guests who saved their worst behavior for people they considered unimportant, Jerry Lewis reportedly made no secret of his disdain for Johnny Carson himself. During one infamous appearance, Lewis repeatedly talked over Johnny, hijacked questions that were intended for other guests, and at one point actually reached over and adjusted Johnny's tie without asking permission. This was a move that visibly annoyed the normally unflappable host. A former producer explained Johnny hated people touching him without permission. It was a well-known rule around the show. You don't touch Johnny unless he starts the contact first. Jerry Lewis knew this rule and did it anyway as a power move. Jerry Lewis's treatment of crew members was allegedly even worse than his disrespect toward Johnny. According to several accounts, he would refuse to learn staff members' names, referring to them simply as, "Hey, you," or by their job function like camera guy or makeup girl, regardless of their experience or how long they've been working in television. One particularly disturbing incident occurred when a camera operator reportedly coughed quietly during Lewis's rehearsal. According to multiple witnesses, Jerry Lewis stopped everything and launched into an absolutely vicious tirade, screaming that the cameraman was a professional who breathes like an amateur and demanding that he be immediately removed from the studio. A floor manager who was present confirmed Jerry screamed at a camera operator for breathing loudly. Not talking, just breathing. The poor guy had allergies. What Johnny Carson found most objectionable about Jerry Lewis was the sharp contrast between his public image as a tireless champion for children and his private behavior toward people who couldn't possibly benefit his career. A producer who worked closely with Johnny recalled the Jekyll and Hyde routine made Johnny's skin crawl. He'd watch Jerry cry on his telethon about loving children, then come to our show and treat people like they were subhuman. After Jerry Lewis's final appearance on The Tonight Show in the early 1980s, Johnny reportedly told his executive producer, "Simply never again," though Johnny rarely banned guests outright. Jerry Lewis joined a very small group of celebrities who were effectively blacklisted from the show during its final decade. Years later, when someone asked Johnny about Jerry Lewis at a private dinner party, he reportedly said something that shocked everyone present with its uncharacteristic harshness. In a town full of fake people, he stands out as truly hateful, and that takes some real doing. So, what do Johnny Carson's private feelings about these 9 difficult guests tell us about Hollywood's true nature? Joan Crawford, Frank Sinatra, Orson Welles, Betty Davis, Mickey Rooney, Zsa Zsa Gabor, Shelley Winters, Jane Russell, and Jerry Lewis offers a rare, completely unfiltered glimpse into reality behind Hollywood's carefully maintained facade of glamour and charm. A longtime Tonight Show producer explained Johnny saw everything. For 30 years, every single major star had to go through him to reach the American public. He knew who was genuine and who was completely faking it. What makes Johnny Carson's assessments particularly valuable is that he had absolutely no reason to exaggerate or make up negative stories about these people. Unlike tabloid journalists or disgruntled employees who might have personal axes to grind, Johnny was at the absolute pinnacle of the entertainment industry. He had nothing to gain by criticizing these celebrities and everything to lose if his honesty damaged relationships with potential future guests. His former producer noted, Johnny wasn't looking to make enemies, just the opposite. He wanted every single interview to go smoothly and be entertaining. When he disliked someone, it was because they had made it completely impossible not to. Johnny Carson's unique position as part gatekeeper and part confessor to the stars gave him an absolutely unparalleled perspective on celebrity culture. For 3 full decades, stars revealed sides of themselves on his couch that they showed nowhere else, creating a bond of trust that made Johnny's private judgments all the more significant and reliable. Perhaps most revealing is how Johnny distinguished between guests who were merely difficult and those he considered truly problematic. He could tolerate eccentricity, nervousness, and even moderate ego, understanding that these traits often came with the territory of fame. What he absolutely could not stand was cruelty, especially toward people who had less power and couldn't fight back. His longtime director recalled, Johnny had a very simple test for judging people's character. How did they treat the pages, the assistants, and the guys working cameras? that told him everything he needed to know about someone's true nature. In the years since Johnny Carson's death in 2005, many of his private opinions have been proven right by broader revelations about these celebrities. Christina Crawford's allegations about her mother Joan, reports about Frank Sinatra's connections to organized crime, and stories of Mickey Rooney's inappropriate behavior have all been supported by multiple other sources. This suggests that Johnny wasn't just being judgmental or overly harsh. He was recognizing genuine character flaws that Hollywood's publicity machine worked overtime to conceal from the public. The most sobering aspect of Johnny Carson's secret blacklist is how effectively the old studio system protected these celebrities, despite their terrible behavior being well known to industry insiders. Long before social media and cancel culture existed, stars could maintain absolutely pristine public images while behaving horribly in private. They were secure in the knowledge that the studios, networks, and publications all had huge financial interests in maintaining their marketability, no matter what they did behind closed doors. As one former Tonight Show writer observed, today, one cell phone video could end someone's career overnight. Back then, a star could literally throw a chair at an assistant, and as long as they sold movie tickets, that story would never leave the building. As we look back on Hollywood's so-called golden age with nostalgia and fondness, Johnny Carson's completely honest assessments serve as a valuable reminder that our cultural icons have always been complicated, flawed human beings. Sometimes they were inspiring and wonderful. Sometimes they were disappointing. And occasionally they were truly disturbing behind their carefully crafted public personas. Johnny's longtime producer remembered, Johnny used to say that the camera doesn't just add 10 pounds, adds a whole layer of fiction. His greatest skill wasn't just interviewing people and making them comfortable. It was seeing through that fiction to discover the truth underneath. These stories remind us that fame and talent don't automatically make someone a good person. Behind the glittering facade of old Hollywood were real human beings with all the same flaws, prejudices, and capacity for cruelty as anyone else. The only difference was that they had the power and protection to get away with behavior that would be unacceptable for ordinary people. Johnny Carson spent 30 years as America's window into celebrity culture, and his secret opinions about these 9 difficult guests give us a rare glimpse of what that world was really like when the cameras stopped rolling and the audiences went home. If these shocking revelations about Johnny Carson's most difficult guests surprise you, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more incredible stories from Hollywood's golden age. Share this video with anyone who loves classic television and wants to know the real truth about their favorite stars. And don't forget to ring that notification bell so you never miss our latest uploads. We got so many more amazing Hollywood secrets waiting to be revealed, and trust me, some of them will absolutely blow your mind. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.